did a queen's passion threaten to topple her throne before it was even secure? Could a fashion revolutionary's wartime romance be a deal with the devil? What happens when a king, sworn to his people, chooses love over duty, igniting a global sensation? Prepare to delve into a past where desire and determination clashed, with society creating sparks that still light up history books. Number 8. The Bachelor King and the Twice-Divorced Woman Who Stole His Crown. King Edward VIII of the United Kingdom was, for a time, one of the world's most eligible bachelors. He was popular, charming, and heir to a vast empire. He had a reputation for enjoying the company of women, often married ones, but no one expected these dalliances to truly threaten his future as king. That all changed when he met Wallis Simpson. She was an American, not an aristocrat, and by the time their relationship became serious, she was on her second marriage, seeking a divorce from her husband, Ernest Simpson. Edward was utterly smitten. He had known Wallis since 1931, introduced by his then-mistress, Lady Furness. Wallis was not beautiful in a conventional sense, but she possessed wit, confidence, and an understanding of Edward that he felt no one else had. As Prince of Wales, his affair with a married woman was already a subject of discreet gossip within high society and government circles. The British press, under a gentleman's agreement, kept a lid on the story, but international newspapers were less restrained. The real scandal erupted when Edward became king in January 1936 upon the death of his father, George V. His determination to marry Wallis Simpson, a woman who would soon be a two-time divorcee, was unthinkable for the time. The King of England was also the supreme governor of the Church of England, which did not permit remarriage after divorce if the former spouse was still alive. For the king to marry Wallis would mean defying the church he headed, a constitutional crisis. The government, led by Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, made it clear that Wallis Simpson would not be acceptable as queen. Public, once they learned the full extent of the situation from the press when the dam finally broke, was deeply divided. Some saw it as a romantic story of a king willing to give up everything for love. Others saw it as a dereliction of duty, an insult to the monarchy and the church. Wallis was often vilified, painted as a scheming adventuress who had ensnared the king. The political and social pressure was immense. Edward was presented with three options: give up Wallis, marry her against the wishes of his ministers, which would likely lead to their resignation and a constitutional standoff, or abdicate. He was determinedly single in his royal role, expected to eventually marry a suitable European princess or British aristocrat. His choice of Wallis, a commoner with a complicated marital history, was a radical departure from all expectations. The affair itself, while he was Prince of Wales and she a married woman, was already scandalous. His insistence on making her his queen consort transformed it into a crisis of unprecedented proportions for the modern monarchy. The government and the royal family, including his mother, Queen Mary, and his brother Albert, the Duke of York, tried to dissuade him. They worried about the stability of the crown and the empire. There were also whispers and concerns about Wallis's character and alleged past associations, including rumors of pro-German sympathies, which added another layer of unease in the tense years leading up to the Second World War. In December 1936, after less than a year on the throne, Edward made his choice. In a poignant radio address, he announced his abdication, famously stating he found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love. He was no longer king. His younger brother, Albert, reluctantly took the throne as King George VI, the father of Queen Elizabeth II. Edward, now titled Duke of Windsor, married Wallis Simpson in France in June 1937. None of the British royal family attended the wedding. Wallis was granted the title Duchess of Windsor, but she was pointedly denied the style of Her Royal Highness, a slight that deeply embittered Edward for the rest of his life. The couple lived mostly in exile, their relationship with the royal family remaining strained. Their story became a cautionary tale, a romantic legend, and a constitutional landmark, all born from an affair that pitted a determinedly single king's private desire against public duty and deeply entrenched societal norms. The scandal was not just the affair, but the earth-shattering choice it forced upon a monarch and his nation. Number 7. The rebel poet, whose passions defied every rule. Lord Byron, or George Gordon Byron, was a superstar of his time. He was the original rock star poet, handsome, brooding, and with a scandalous reputation that only made him more fascinating to the public. He was also, for significant periods, determinedly single, embracing a life of freedom and romantic adventure that thumbed its nose at the prim conventions of Regency England. His affairs were numerous, but two in particular cemented his image as mad, bad, and dangerous to know, a phrase coined by one of his lovers, Lady Caroline Lamb. Lady Caroline Lamb was a vibrant, eccentric, and married aristocrat when she first encountered Byron in 1812. She was instantly obsessed. She famously described him in her diary as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Their affair was a whirlwind of passion, public spectacle, and emotional turmoil. Caroline was not discreet. She pursued Byron openly, even dressing as a page boy to try and see him. Their relationship was fiery and unstable. Byron, easily bored and perhaps unnerved by her intensity, soon tried to break it off. Caroline's reaction was extreme. She sent him a lock of her pubic hair with a letter written in blood, staged dramatic scenes, and even attempted to stab herself at a ball. The scandal was enormous, providing endless fodder for society gossips. Here was a leading poet, a lord of the realm, entangled with a high-born married woman behaving in a way that shattered every expectation of aristocratic decorum. Byron himself was no stranger to shocking behavior. He cultivated an image of a world-weary traveler, a brooding romantic hero, much like the characters in his poems, such as Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. This persona allowed him a certain latitude, but even his most ardent fans were taken aback by the intensity and public nature of the Lamb affair. It damaged his social standing, though it paradoxically boosted his literary fame, his readers seeing his life and art as inextricably linked. If the affair with Lady Caroline Lamb was a public firestorm, his relationship with his half-sister, Augusta Lee, was a deeper, darker secret and potentially far more ruinous. Augusta was married with children. Byron had always been close to her, but in 1813, their affection seems to have crossed a line into an incestuous affair. The evidence is largely circumstantial, found in their letters and Byron's poetry, but it was strong enough to fuel persistent, horrified rumors. Augusta gave birth to a daughter, Medora Lee, in 1814, and many believed Byron was the father. Incest was a profound taboo, a sin and a crime. If proven, it would have meant complete social ostracism and possibly legal consequences for Byron. He briefly married Annabella Milbank in 1815, perhaps seeking respectability or escape from his complicated emotional life. The marriage was a disaster, lasting only a year. Annabella, a prim and intelligent woman, was horrified by Byron's behavior, his moods, his debts, and it is strongly suspected his confessions or her discoveries about Augusta. When Annabella left him, taking their infant daughter Ada Lovelace with her, the rumors about Augusta reached fever pitch. Combined weight of his debts, the public nature of his separation from Annabella, and the ever-present whispers of incest and other debaucheries made England too hostile for Byron. In 1816, he left the country, never to return. He was, in effect, exiled by scandal. His determinedly single lifestyle, in the sense of resisting the constraints of conventional monogamous marriage and embracing a libertine existence, had caught up with him. His affairs, particularly these two, were not just private indiscretions but flagrant violations of social and moral codes, magnified by his fame. They contributed to his myth as a tortured genius, but they also exacted a heavy personal price, forcing him to live out his remaining years abroad, still writing, still engaging in new affairs, but forever marked by the scandals of his youth. Number 6. The Empress who ruled alone and loved powerfully. Catherine the Great of Russia was not born to rule. A German princess named Sophie, she came to Russia to marry the heir Peter. Their marriage was a disaster. Peter was immature and unpopular, while Catherine was intelligent, ambitious, and learned to navigate the treacherous waters of the Russian court. She was determined to survive and thrive. After Peter became Tsar Peter III, his erratic behavior and pro-Prussian policies alienated key figures in the military and nobility. Catherine, seizing her moment, orchestrated a coup d'état in 1762. Peter was overthrown and later died in mysterious circumstances. Catherine became Empress of all Russia. Having rid herself of an unsuitable husband, Catherine never remarried. She chose to rule as an autocrat, a determinedly single woman on one of the world's most powerful thrones. This decision alone was remarkable for the era. Catherine also understood the importance of companionship, support, and perhaps pleasure. She embarked on a series of relationships with influential men who became not just her lovers, but often her closest advisors and political allies. These were not quiet, hidden affairs. They were part of the fabric of her reign, though they still generated considerable gossip and at times scandal. Her most significant relationship was with Grigory Potemkin. Potemkin was a brilliant statesman, a military leader, and a man of immense charisma and ambition. Their passionate affair began in the early 1770s, and even after the romantic intensity faded, they remained lifelong friends and political partners. There are even theories they secretly married, though this has never been definitively proven. Potemkin wielded enormous power, largely thanks to Catherine's favor. He was instrumental in Russia's expansion southwards, including the annexation of Crimea. Their bond was so strong that even when they took other lovers, they often sought each other's approval for their new partners. The nature of Catherine's relationships was scandalous to some, particularly outside Russia, or among more conservative elements within. European courts, often bound by stricter marital conventions for their rulers, whispered about the Russian empress and her succession of favorites. Satirists and political enemies portrayed her as licentious, a woman ruled by her desires. The sheer number of her lovers, historians count at least 12 prominent ones, and possibly more, fueled these perceptions. Each new favorite would be showered with titles, lands, and wealth, which sometimes led to accusations of cronyism or extravagance. However, within Russia, Catherine's position as an unmarried ruler who took lovers was often viewed differently, or at least with more complexity. She was a strong, effective empress who presided over a golden age of Russian expansion and cultural development. Her favorites were often men of considerable ability. Like Potemkin or Grigory Orlov, who helped her seize the throne, she chose them. She was in control. This was a key distinction. She was not a weak woman manipulated by men. She was a powerful sovereign who selected her consorts. Yet, the image of a female ruler with multiple lovers was potent. Vicious rumors circulated, the most infamous and entirely untrue being that she died while attempting sexual congress with a horse. This piece of black propaganda illustrates the extent to which her private life was used to try and discredit her rule, playing on societal discomfort with powerful women who also expressed their sexuality openly. Catherine's determinedly single status as empress allowed her a degree of freedom that a queen consort, or even a king bound by expectations of dynastic marriage, might not have had. She turned what could have been a vulnerability, a woman ruling alone, into a system where her personal relationships often reinforced her political power. The affairs were scandalous by the standards of many, and certainly provided fodder for her enemies, but they were also inextricably linked to her long and largely successful reign. She defied the convention that a female ruler needed a king beside her, proving she could manage both her empire and her heart on her own terms. Number 5. The independent woman who wore trousers and loved freely. Amantine the Seal Aurora Dupam, better known by her male pen name George Sand, was a force of nature in 19th century France. She was a prolific and celebrated novelist, a trailblazer for women's rights, and a figure who scandalized Parisian society with her unconventional lifestyle. After an unhappy early marriage to Casimir Dudevant, from whom she legally separated, Sand embraced a life of determined independence, particularly in her romantic affairs. She refused to be constrained by the era's rigid expectations for women. One of the most visible ways Sand defied convention was by wearing men's clothing and smoking cigars in public. This was not merely a fashion statement. It was a practical choice that allowed her greater freedom of movement in Paris, access to places generally off-limits to women, and it was a clear symbol of her rejection of traditional femininity. Her masculine presentation was shocking enough to many, but it was her series of high-profile love affairs that truly cemented her scandalous reputation. Sand sought passion and intellectual connection in her relationships. She had numerous lovers, many of them famous artists and writers of the day. Two of her most notable affairs were with the poet Alfred de Musset and the composer Frédéric Chopin. Her relationship with Musset, beginning in 1833, was intense, tumultuous, and very public. They traveled to Venice together, a trip that became legendary for its dramatic ups and downs, including mutual infidelities and illness. Their affair was marked by passionate declarations, bitter quarrels, and painful separations. It inspired works by both of them, laying bare their emotional struggles for all to read. For a woman, especially a separated woman, still legally tied to a husband, to live so openly with a lover, and for that relationship to be so openly tempestuous, was deeply scandalous. Her subsequent long-term relationship with Frédéric Chopin, which lasted from 1838 to 1847, was different in tone, but no less unconventional. Chopin was more reserved, and his health was delicate. Sand took on a caregiving role, but they were also intellectual and artistic companions. They spent winters in Majorca and summers at her country estate, Nohant. This domestic arrangement outside the bonds of marriage between a renowned female author and a famous composer continued to raise eyebrows. Sand was the more dominant personality, protective of Chopin, but also, some said, overbearing. Their eventual breakup was painful, and also played out somewhat publicly through their correspondence and the accounts of their friends. The scandal of George Sand's affairs stemmed from several factors. Firstly, she was a woman taking the initiative in love and sex, much like a man would, which was unacceptable in patriarchal society. Secondly, she was open about her relationships, refusing to hide them in shame. Her novels often explored themes of love, marriage, and female independence, further challenging social norms. Thirdly, her lovers were often younger or more famous at the start of their affairs, leading to accusations that she was predatory or using them for her own ends, though this was usually unfair. She was a financially independent woman, a successful author in her own right. Many contemporaries, particularly men, condemned her. She was called immoral, a threat to family values. Yet, she also had many admirers who saw her as courageous and brilliant, a symbol of female emancipation. She lived her life on her own terms, determinedly single in spirit, even if legally separated rather than divorced initially. Divorce was illegal in France for part of her adult life. She chose her partners, managed her career, and raised her children, all while flouting the codes of conduct prescribed for women. Her affairs were scandalous precisely because they represented a woman's claim to the same romantic and sexual freedoms that men had long taken for granted. She wasn't just having affairs. She was living a philosophy of emotional and intellectual liberty. Number 4. The Hollywood Siren who made singledom. Her seductive superpower. Mae West was more than just an actress. She was a cultural phenomenon who built an entire career on celebrating female sexuality and independence, all while maintaining a determinedly single public persona for most of her heyday. She wrote many of her own lines and plays, crafting an image of a woman who was entirely in control of her own desires and destiny, often to the shock and consternation of censors and polite society in the 1920s, 30s, and beyond. Born in 1893, Mae West began in vaudeville, honing her unique style of suggestive wit and confident allure. Her 1926 Broadway play, titled Sex, which she wrote, produced, and directed, landed her in jail for 10 days on obscenity charges. The scandal, of course, only boosted her fame. She understood that controversy sold tickets and that her persona as a sexually liberated woman was both her brand and her power. When Hollywood beckoned in the early 1930s, she brought this persona with her, single-handedly saving Paramount Pictures from bankruptcy with a string of hit films like She Done Him Wrong and I'm No Angel. In these films and in her public life, Mae West was the epitome of the determinedly single woman who enjoyed the company of men, but was never dependent on them. Her famous lines, like, "Is that a pistol in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me? And when I'm good, I'm very good, but when I'm bad, I'm better," were delivered with a knowing wink. She portrayed women who were unapologetic about their sexual appetites and their financial independence. This was revolutionary at a time when female characters in film were often damsels in distress or virtuous heroines waiting for marriage. Her affairs, or at least the public perception of them, were part of this carefully constructed image. She was linked to numerous men, often younger, and projected an air of someone who collected admirers. While she had a very early brief marriage to fellow vaudevillian Frank Wallis in 1911, it was kept secret for decades, and they lived apart almost immediately. For all intents and purposes, she lived and presented herself as a single woman. Her romantic life was portrayed as a series of enjoyable encounters, rather than a search for a husband. This was scandalous because it challenged the fundamental societal belief that a woman's ultimate goal was marriage and motherhood. Mae West suggested that women could have fulfilling, exciting lives without either, and could even enjoy sex for its own sake. The Hays Code, Hollywood censorship, guidelines, constantly battled Mae West. Her scripts were heavily scrutinized, her lines cut. But she was a master of innuendo, able to convey a scandalous amount with a look, a gesture, or a cleverly phrased double entendre. Her very existence in the public eye was a scandal to moral guardians. She was accused of corrupting youth and promoting promiscuity. Religious groups protested her films. What made her so particularly, determinedly single in the context of her scandalous affairs was that her power came from not needing any one man. She was the one in charge, the one who said, "Come up and see me sometime." Men were accessories to her fabulous life, not the center of it. This independence was threatening to the patriarchal order. She wasn't just having flings. She was embodying a philosophy of female self-possession that was decades ahead of its time. Even in her later years, she maintained this persona, living with Paul Novak, a former Mussulman, and Mr. California, who was 30 years her junior, for nearly 3 decades until her death. While this was a long-term relationship, she never married him, preserving her image of independence. Mae West's Scandal was her life's work, a bold, brassy, and highly successful assertion that a woman could be single, sexual, powerful, and entirely her own boss. She made being a fallen woman look like a lot more fun than being a virtuous one. And that was the most delicious scandal of all. Number 3. The fashion queen's wartime romance with a shadowy German officer. Gabrielle Coco Chanel was the undisputed queen of Parisian haute couture, a woman who revolutionized fashion by emphasizing comfort, simplicity, and a chic, boyish elegance. She was also fiercely independent and determinedly single throughout her life, despite a string of high-profile lovers that included Russian Grand Dukes and British aristocrats. Her business empire was built on her own talent and drive. One affair, conducted during the darkest days of the Second World War, cast a long and sinister shadow over her legacy, becoming her most profound scandal. When Germany occupied Paris in 1940, Chanel closed her fashion house, claiming it was not a time for fashion. She continued to live in her luxurious apartment at the Hotel Ritz, which also happened to be a favored residence for high-ranking German officers. It was here that she began a relationship with Baron Hans Gunther von Dinklage, a German intelligence officer 12 years her junior. Dinklage, known as Spas, meaning sparrow, was a suave, well-connected figure in espionage circles. Their affair was not a secret. Living openly with a German officer in occupied Paris was, at the very least, a terrible lapse of judgment for a French icon like Chanel. Many Parisians were starving or resisting the occupation, and her comfortable life at the Ritz, in the company of the enemy, was seen as a betrayal. The scandal here was not just about an unmarried woman having an affair, which Chanel had done many times before, without much lasting damage to her core reputation for independence. This was about fraternizing and seemingly thriving with the occupying power while her country suffered. The scandal deepened considerably after the war, with revelations about the extent of Chanel and Dinklage's activities. Declassified intelligence documents years later suggested that Chanel was not merely a passive companion. She was allegedly recruited as an agent for Abwehr, German military intelligence, with the agent number Finus 7124 and the code name Westminster, a nod to her former lover, the Duke of Westminster. In 1943, she and Dinklage were reportedly involved in a secret mission codenamed Operation Model Hut, or Model Hat. Plan was to use Chanel's acquaintance with Winston Churchill through the Duke of Westminster to convey a message to him about a potential separate peace between Germany and Britain, driven by SS officials who believed the war was lost for Germany. Chanel traveled to Madrid with Dinklage, supposedly to meet British embassy officials. The mission ultimately failed, perhaps because Churchill, informed of her intent, refused to engage, or because her contacts were not as strong as believed. After the liberation of Paris in 1944, many women accused of horizontal collaboration having relationships with German soldiers had their heads shaved and were paraded through the streets in shame. Chanel was arrested and questioned by the French Free Forces. However, she was released after only a few hours, allegedly due to the intervention of Churchill himself, though this is debated. She promptly left France for Switzerland, where she lived in self-imposed exile for nearly a decade. The full details of her wartime activities remained murky for many years. Chanel herself rarely spoke of it and fiercely protected her image. When she returned to Paris in 1954 to relaunch her fashion house, She faced a hostile French press, but her new modern designs eventually won over a new generation, particularly in America. The scandal of Coco Chanel's affair with Dinklage and her alleged collaboration is profound because it complicates the image of a pioneering, determinedly single woman who broke barriers. It raises uncomfortable questions about her judgment, her morality, and her patriotism. While some argue she was a pragmatist trying to survive or protect her assets, or even that she was naive, others see her actions as a deep betrayal. Her determined singledom and independence, usually sources of strength and admiration, took on a different light when applied to navigating the moral ambiguities of wartime occupation alongside a Nazi officer. It remains the most controversial chapter in the life of a woman who otherwise epitomized French chic and resilience. Number 2. The fiery Italian poet and the diva whose heart he publicly broke. Gabriele D'Annunzio was an Italian poet, journalist, playwright, war hero, and proto-fascist political leader. He was a man of immense ego, flamboyant style, and a voracious appetite for life, especially for women. Though he married Maria Hardouin de Galiza in 1883 and had children, their marriage quickly deteriorated, and he lived a life of determined bachelorhood in practice, embarking on a relentless series of highly publicized affairs with some of the era's most famous and beautiful women. His relationships were not quiet liaisons. They were often dramatic, public spectacles, integral to his carefully crafted image as a decadent superman and artist. One of his most famous and scandalous affairs was with the legendary Italian actress Eleonora Duse. Duse was already a celebrated international star, renowned for her naturalistic acting style and her sensitive portrayals, a stark contrast to the more declamatory style then in vogue. When she met D'Annunzio in 1894, she was in her late 30s, and he was slightly younger. She fell deeply in love with him, seeing him as a great artistic genius. Their relationship was passionate and artistically fruitful, at least initially. Duse became D'Annunzio's muse and the leading interpreter of his plays, such as La Gioconda and Francesca da Rimini. She poured her own money into producing his often lavish and expensive theatrical works, believing in his talent even when audiences were skeptical. She hoped their collaboration would revolutionize Italian theater. D'Annunzio, in turn, was inspired by her intensity and artistry. However, D'Annunzio was also notoriously unfaithful and cruel. While with Duse, he continued to have other affairs. The true scandal, beyond the typical transgression of an affair involving a married man and a prominent single woman, Duse was separated from her husband, erupted with D'Annunzio's blatant exploitation of their relationship for his own literary and personal gain. In 1900, he published a novel titled Il Fuoco, or The Flame of Life. The novel was a thinly veiled and highly unflattering account of his affair with Duse. He depicted the aging actress, called La Foscarina, in the book as possessive and declining, while her young lover, Stelio Efrena, clearly D'Annunzio himself, was portrayed as a vibrant artistic genius. The book detailed intimate aspects of their relationship, exposing Duse's vulnerabilities and passions to public scrutiny. Duse was profoundly humiliated and heartbroken by this betrayal. She had given him her love, her money, and her artistic devotion, and he had repaid her by turning their private life into sensationalist literature that mocked her. The public was shocked by D'Annunzio's caddishness. While he had always cultivated an image of a libertine, this public vivisection of a beloved figure like Duse was seen as a step too far even for him. It was a scandal of artistic exploitation and emotional cruelty. Despite the immense pain Il Fuoco caused her, Duse, with remarkable fortitude, even gave D'Annunzio permission to publish it, perhaps believing it was part of his artistic process or feeling powerless to stop him. Their relationship eventually ended, though they had sporadic contact later in life. Dews continued her illustrious career, but the emotional scars remained. Anzio's life was a continuous parade of such scandals. He lived extravagantly, accumulated massive debts, and constantly sought new conquests and new sensations. His determinedly single lifestyle, in defiance of his marital status, was central to his persona as an artist living beyond bourgeois morality. His affair with Dews, however, stands out for its particular cruelty and its illustration of how his artistic ambition often overshadowed any sense of personal loyalty or decency. It was a scandal that showcased the destructive side of his flamboyant genius, leaving one of the greatest actresses of her time publicly wounded by the man she had adored and supported. The poet got his sensational novel, but the diva paid a heavy price. Number 1. The Virgin Queen and the Courtier, whose wife died so conveniently. Queen Elizabeth I of England, famously, never married, cultivating the image of the Virgin Queen wedded to her kingdom. Her decision to remain single was a complex political strategy in a world where royal marriages were tools of statecraft. Any hint of a romantic entanglement, especially with a subject, was fraught with peril and instantly became a scandal of the highest order. Her longest, deepest, and most scandalous attachment was to Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. Elizabeth and Robert Dudley had known each other since childhood. They were even imprisoned in the Tower of London at the same time, under different circumstances, during the turbulent reign of Elizabeth's half-sister, Mary I. When Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1558, Dudley immediately became her favorite. He was handsome, charming, a skilled horseman, and he held the influential position of Master of the Horse, which gave him constant, close access to the Queen. Their intimacy was undeniable and fueled rampant speculation. They were openly affectionate, spending a great deal of time together. Ambassadors and courtiers noted their closeness with alarm or anticipation. Rumors flew that the Queen intended to marry Dudley. This prospect was scandalous for several reasons. Firstly, Dudley was already married. His wife, Amy Robsart, lived in the country, away from court, suffering from an illness reportedly breast cancer. For the Queen to be so familiar with a married man was unseemly. Secondly, even if Dudley were free, marrying a subject rather than a foreign prince for a strategic alliance was highly controversial, could create jealousy among other nobles, and offer no international advantages. The scandal reached a fever pitch in September 1560 with the mysterious death of Amy Robsart. She was found dead at the bottom of a short flight of stairs at Cumnor Place, her rented house. Coroner's jury returned a verdict of accidental death, suggesting she might have fallen. However, the timing was incredibly convenient for Dudley, who was now free to marry the Queen should she wish it. Rumors immediately spread like wildfire. Dudley had arranged his wife's murder. Some even whispered that Elizabeth herself was complicit. The Amy Robsart scandal was a massive crisis for the young Queen. Her enemies, both domestic and foreign, seized upon it as proof of her unfitness to rule or of Dudley's wicked ambition. Elizabeth knew that marrying Dudley under such a cloud of suspicion would be disastrous for her reputation and her hold on the throne. Though Dudley was eventually cleared by the inquest, the stain of suspicion never entirely vanished. Despite the scandal, Elizabeth's deep affection for Dudley endured. She made him Earl of Leicester and a Privy Councillor, keeping him close for decades. They flirted, they quarreled, they confided in each other. Question of whether their relationship was ever consummated has been debated by historians for centuries. There is no definitive proof either way, but the perception of their intimacy, combined with Dudley's ambition and the shadow of his wife's death, meant their bond remained a source of gossip and political maneuvering throughout much of her reign. Dudley himself hoped to marry Elizabeth for years. He even tried to pressure her at times. Elizabeth, however, always pulled back from the brink. Perhaps the Amy Robsart affair had shown her just how dangerous such a marriage would be. Or perhaps she was truly committed to her Virgin Queen persona and her political independence. She famously told Parliament, "I will have but one mistress here, and no master." Even when Dudley later secretly married Letice Knollys, a cousin of the Queen, Elizabeth was reportedly furious, feeling betrayed. This reaction only underscored the unique and intense nature of her bond with Dudley. Elizabeth I's relationship with Robert Dudley remains one of history's most tantalizing royal romances. It was scandalous because it threatened the image of the untouchable Virgin Queen, because it involved a subject of questionable reputation, whose wife died under a dark cloud, and because it highlighted the immense pressures on a female monarch in a man's world. Elizabeth's determined singledom was a cornerstone of her rule. Yet her heart, it seemed, belonged to Robert Dudley, creating a lifelong tension that captivated and scandalized her court and her country. Her ability to navigate this personal and political minefield, ultimately choosing her kingdom over marriage, cemented her legendary status.